just want to, kick off with this topic, which I went quite literally into the topic. So just mind me, I got a little bit cheesy with the heart, but I actually was astounded by the connections that the heart has to the way that we live life. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a video. Let's see if this clicker works. Do I press again?
The heart is a pumping engine which, from its earliest appearance in the embryo to the end of our life, keeps our blood in circulation so that all our organs may grow and perform their appointed tasks. Few people realize the amount of work required of this small mass of muscle, no larger than a man's fist. Considered as an engine, the heart is rated as having only about 1/240th of a horsepower, but it is an engine which sometimes remains in motion for 60, 80 or more years without layups, repairs, or replacements. You will say that a motor of only 1/240th horsepower is not very strong, but the work done by the heart, beating 70 times per minute, could in 1 hour raise the weight of 4 tons over a distance of 1 foot. The energy expanded by the heart in the course of a whole day could, if he were not in a hurry, lift a person weighing 150 pounds to the very top of the Empire State Building. Or it could, in 1 day, fill a tank holding 2,500 gallons, or about 10 tons of fluid. The heart beats by contracting rhythmically. Normally, it contracts about 70 times per minute. This amounts to about 100,000 beats in the course of 24 hours and nearly 36 million times in a year. Could you, without tiring, perform a similar task with your hands more than 100,000 times in 1 day? How then can the heart, without ceasing and without fatigue, perform its big task over the years of a lifetime? The answer is that the heart takes a short rest between each beat, and the rest amounts to about 12 hours in the course of 24. During these rest periods, the heart recovers for the next beat. It teaches the lesson that periods of rest are necessary for sustained efficiency. Without these rest periods, the heart could not execute the 36 million pump strokes which are required to keep us alive for 1 year.
So, a little bit of a biology lesson there, but I'm not a biologist. I just thought it was so intriguing that the heart literally sustains our lives, that the way the heart functions could serve as really insightful lessons in terms of the way that we approach life as well. So in that little biology lesson at the end, I don't know if you could hear clearly because of that American accent, but what he was saying, and this is an old school video, but it just shows that the heart, the reason why I chose that video is because the heart hasn't changed. It's literally the same innovation that has been created since the beginning of humanity. It still functions, it's still sustainable, it's sustaining lives to this day. Isn't there something intriguing about the design of it that allows life to take place? And so when looking at the heart, it goes from this process of diastole to systole, diastole to systole. And in there it said it releases or relaxes and tenses, relaxes and tenses. And there's a cadence, there's this heartbeat that starts to form with this relaxing and tensing. And it kind of reflects the way that we should live our lives, is that there's an intense kind of intensity or activity that's taking place, and the fibers in your cardiac area gather and pull together. The resources are kind of coming together to prepare for this intense moment, for this activity that's about to take place. It brings everything together and squeezes, and things go out. And then when it relaxes, those muscles or those fibers kind of release, and the blood fills back into the heart cavity, or the area where the heart obviously pumps. And this is kind of intriguing, because I think the fact that we go through life with intense activity and options to release and to relax is so, so important. Some of us just stay in this systole moment of intense activity, ongoing, non-ending, just intensity throughout the week. And then on the weekend, we keep it up with whatever activities we're doing. We just keep up that intensity. And we never let go and allow ourselves to relax in that diastole. And the interesting thing is that during that diastole moment, however you say it, because I'm probably like butchering the, the language here, but during that moment of release, there's a filling up. And you can decide what that is. It could be a spiritual filling up. It could be just a filling up of your cup. Whatever way that you relax, there's an opportunity for that heart to expand and fill up with what it needs in order to go back into that season of intense activity to pump up the volumes of work that we need to do. And so I just want you to close your eyes for a second. And I just love the moment that we came into just before this. So thank you, Vanessa. That was such an incredible session. But I just want you to reflect on your own personal life, because sustainability starts with you. You can't speak about the broader picture, which we're going to go into just now, unless you have a picture within yourself. So if you can just, if you don't mind closing your eyes and just thinking about what is the cadence of your life at the moment. Are you in like a stuck area of just complete intense activity? Do you have opportunity to release? What is your current heart rate right now in this room? Is it sustainable? Is the way that you're living sustainable? When will your next moment of intense activity come? When will you be able to prepare those fibers? How will you pull those resources together, create community of support around you in order to be able to get through that season of intense activity? And then think about it as well, when will your next moment of diastole be? When will you be able to release and reflect on what just took place? How will you fill up? What will be filling you up? And how will you use what has just filled you up in this next season of activity? Will you plan for this cadence in your life? Will you learn to live to the rhythm of your life's heartbeat? Cool. So you can open your eyes. And obviously, I can't have a direct say into your own personal life, but I just really wanted to make the point that we can't talk about sustainability unless you are sustaining yourself. And I think there were other previous speakers that spoken to like the financial part of sustainability and how important that is as creatives and artists, but how will you sustain yourself, your physical health, the way that you engage with people? Are you, do you know yourself? Are you self-aware? How do you respond to certain situations? Those are such important things when it comes to sustainability, the well-being of your own self. But we're going to be speaking about overall well-being, because well-being is not just individual, it's about a collective well-being. It's about a societal and economic system well-being. And this is really kind of where my work focuses, is what does a well-being economy look like? How can we think about people and planet in terms of this economic system? Are we serving an economic system, or is the economic system serving us as a people and planet? But let's start here. Sustainability, what does this actually mean? So for those who are not aware, the planet is in a crisis, humanity is in a crisis. We are at the point where we have to intervene, and an urgent intervention is needed. And similarly to this exercise around the heart, it's exactly the same with the earth, it's the same with the planet, that we are in this constant thing of extracting, exploitation, non-rest for our planet. Our planet hasn't got a chance to regenerate in order to kind of recuperate and rest, in order to create the resources we require. And so we are taking more than we can actually cope with in this world. And this is where sustainability comes in. It actually means our ability to sustain. Very easy. And we're speaking about the planet's way, the way that the planet can sustain life. This is what we're trying to answer when we're thinking about sustainability. How do we ensure that we think about the future generations, that the world doesn't just end with us, but that it continues? And it has existed for millions of years, but will we be the generation that puts an end to it? Or will we be able to ensure that it continues? And obviously, different people have different opinions on this, so obviously I'm just sharing my personal point of view, but we really have come to a time where we have to think about how we do life, how we do business, how we do community, how we engage with each other from a social perspective, from any kind of way that we interact. We have to really be interrogating that. And so in 1976, this word came about, and we are like 3 decades later, and we still don't really know how to be sustainable in the way that we do life. And the question that I'd like you to think about for yourself in your own heart is, why? Like, we've heard this word. I've heard it like many times. It's become just kind of like, just, what do you call it? Off a duck's back. It just like rolls off. You just hear it and it kind of just doesn't actually have an impact on who you are, or what you say, or how you live life. And I wanted to ask, like, why? Why have we ignored this word, ignored the planet's signs for the last 3 decades? And I think creativity has a role to play in helping us not ignore this. How can we use creativity to kind of emphasize the alarm bells that are currently ringing? How can we use creativity to kind of showcase and make people feel connected back to what's happening on their planet? And I think artists are really one of the people or groups that have been doing this for generations, that have showcased what is happening on a societal level and made it visible to the ignorant eye. And I really want us to think about our role as creatives, our role in society is, how are we going to showcase the need for sustainability? How are we going to live with integrity in the way that we do our work? Are we just going to speak these sexy words, speak these words that everybody wants to hear, or is it going to be like visible in the way that you do your work, in the way that you live your life? So the Sustainable Development Goals, they were started by the UN, and it was a General Assembly, I think it was 2015, and they said, we are going to start these Sustainable Development Goals that we want to achieve by 2030. How do you feel? Does anyone know about the Sustainable Development Goals? If you're feeling positive about them, put up your hand. Some hands. Shaky hands, okay, very few. So yeah, I think they weren't a bad concept. I think they're really interesting. And we do need ways to kind of bring this collective thought around sustainability together. Because the thing is, there are so many ways that we can approach sustainability. And being creatives, we can start new ones and we can develop lots more. Trust me, we can go like beyond what is needed. But the issue at the moment is that I think there's too many. We're not actually interrogating the ones that we have and thinking about how we can do better. And because so many people are using different indicators, it's hard for us to meet at the same level or to speak the same language. And so again, it perpetuates this thing of working in silos because we're not connected. We're not connected in what we're wanting to achieve. So that's where the SDGs help, the Sustainable Development Goals, is like, let's come together, let's kind of think about these 17 things that we're wanting to achieve as a society. How are we going to make economic and environmental goals in order for us to achieve like a beautiful, thriving planet by 2030? So that's what I love about the SDGs. But the issue is they're not being achieved. We're in 2022, and I don't know if we're going to get there by the 2030. So innovations are great. Creativity is absolutely incredible. But how do we bring it together? How do we make sure that we work connected? And this is an opportunity, and I was going to say, these spaces, these places for us to connect, this is where sustainability starts. It starts in creative spaces like this, when we are speaking one-to-one about how we can think about a new way of doing business together. How can we create innovations that work with this person? So how do we make sure that our ecosystems of business are connected and interdependent? That is so crucial. And we've lived in a world that is telling us to be independent is the way to go, to live like, just with no reliability. And obviously we've been let down by so many different people, perhaps, and we've got this baggage. But I want to say that working independently is really tough. You won't be able to achieve sustainability on your own. So we have to remain connected. And I really believe that creativity is at the heart of sustainability because it should be rooted in social, economic, environmental, and cultural practices. Creativity touches on all those areas, and those are the things that we're wanting to see be sustainable. So, we need to move away from the traditional way of doing business. The traditional way, and I really believe that this is changing, so I'm just speaking to the converted in this sentence, is that we know we need to move away from business that is extractive, where faster and cheaper is the way to go. That's what traditional business has been like. Whoever's the fastest to market, whoever can do it for the cheapest, that is the way we're going to get profit. And we're trying to move away to a model, towards a model that says faster, cheaper is not the way to go. Let's think about new ways in which to do business. And they are an umbrella of different types. So I'm sure you've heard, because I think you had a sustainability session as well earlier around circular economy. So I'm not going to go into those terms because I don't want to repeat what's already been said. But they are circular economies. There's post-growth organizations. There's a call for degrowth. Do you know that every single country has an obsession around GDP, which is about growing the economy, and we're hearing it all the time now, especially when we're thinking about our underemployment in South Africa. It's like, how do we grow the economy so that we can get more jobs, so that we can have more people exploited in various situations? We have to really kind of like pause and say, clearly this hasn't been working. Every single country has been trying to do this for the longest period of time. There's something that is broken, and we believe that it is this obsession around GDP. Because GDP is not the only thing that matters. The well-being of people is not indicated through the GDP. It's actually the reverse. The more extractive, the more people are slaves to the economy, is when the GDP increases. That's what GDP measures. If you had a tree in a forest that is cut down, the GDP increases, because it's used for resources and whatever is going to be used towards business. But it doesn't actually measure what is happening through the destruction of that tree. And so what we're trying to say is that the economy needs to measure what actually matters, which is people and planet. And going to the next slide, because I've probably just messed all of this around, I really believe that creativity is born out of empathy. And this is where we start. When I ask the question, why are we ignorant? Because nobody really cares. Because the governments don't care. Because our prime ministers, presidents, they haven't cared. And this is the role that we get to play as creatives, is how do we make people care? How do we connect what's happening around us to the reality of how we live life? This is the role that we really get to play, is that showcasing empathy. And I know probably you're familiar with the design thinking process. It's these processes that are inherent in creativity that showcase why, that showcase the why to various people. And I think this is where we need to start. You need to think for your own business, why? Why do we care about sustainability? Because if you can't answer that question, just adding things, which is what leads us to greenwashing, around just adding things that look pretty, that sound sustainable, oh, I'm going to use this instead of this, that's not the answer. To just add plasters to the wound is not the answer. You have to ask the question, why am I doing this in the first place? And if you can't answer that for yourself as a business, it's going to be really hard to convince others that this is needed. So we really want to encourage the fact that we need to ask why. The other thing I want to say, and I don't know if it's the next slide, yes, creativity is a special kind of renewable resource. It's the only resource that we can use over and over and over and over and over again. We can't do that with the planetary resources, which are limited. And this is why I think it's such a cool thing to bring to the table, is like, let's use something that is renewable, which is creativity. It's the heart of sustainability. And that's what we're speaking about when it comes to the heart. It's not to exploit creativity, and we can see obviously the negative repercussions of how creativity can be used, abused in various contexts. But I want to say, in terms of the positive side of the fact that it is renewable, it can be the thing that sustains sustainability in its sense. I don't know if that makes sense, because what I'm trying to showcase is that analogy that we had at the heart of what drives sustainability. Sustainability can't just be a catchphrase, but if we use creativity to drive the fact that it is needed, that it is wanted, that it is desired by this generation, I think that is the driving force towards a society that looks to sustainability. So that kind of is just where my thoughts were going with the fact that it's a renewable resource. It's also creative intelligence and creative literacy that is required. So we're finding more and more, as economies and governments are starting to realize the importance of cultural spaces, of cities that are built around creativity. We've got UNESCO, we've got a lot of different organizations that are rallying towards creativity. There is a new language or creative intelligence that is starting to be formed. And I think it's really us that gets to set the tone of what that looks like. And what I would hate for to happen is for it to just be like any other industry that becomes elite, that becomes like, oh, we use this language when we speak. We have to make sure that creativity is accessible, that anybody can feel like they are able to contribute to this space. If we are going to have this creative intelligence and creative literacy that people are drawn to and are starting to see, hey, okay, if creativity is at the heart of sustainability, we need to bring these people in. We need to have more talks. We need to have these webinars around creativity. How do we make sure that those spaces are not shutting people out? And I think this is really, really important, is that knowledge needs to be accessible. It needs to be coherent, and it needs to be co-created. So again, just emphasizing this thing of working in silos is that we can't just create our own set of knowledge and think this is the thing that is, we speak about this language of pioneering, which is great. You can pioneer, but acknowledge the community that you've done that with. Acknowledge the community that has contributed to that pioneering and bring it to the forefront. Because this co-creation, I just really want to say, is so important to the way that we think about the economy as well. So these things that I'm speaking about, creativity, I'll showcase just now how it aligns to the economy. If we just think about outcomes, if we just think about the goal of like, I am the pioneer, I came up with this creative solution, that is exactly what bad business is doing. They want to be the fastest to market. They want to make sure they're seen above everybody else. We're just perpetuating what the current traditional model is already doing. And so I just want us to have that red flag as creatives, is don't imitate what we've already seen in the world. How can we showcase a different way of doing? Making sure that we are thinking about the process more than just the outcome. Because it's the process, the designing, the co-creating of getting to that outcome, which is the most important part. And the economy does the same thing. It's top-down approach. It's these people saying, oh, we've got this solution. Oh, we've got this new policy that we're bringing into place in this region. But have the people had a say in what that policy looks like? Has there been a process, a participatory process, budgeting with the local community or the city or the country that is partaking in what that policy will look like in their own spaces? So we need to make sure that we're mindful of the way that we create to ensure that it is inclusive, that it is accessible, and that is not just for a certain elite. And creativity drives society, and I think this is obviously I think we should feel that by now in spaces like Maboneng and the city of Joburg, who are also speaking about the heartbeat of the country. They're really excited and obviously showcasing creativity in this city, which is great. And I think we know that creativity is such an important part of culture. A city that has no creativity has no soul, and I think that is really well known and accepted. But in addition to that, I also think that these things, like having sustainable development goals, those things should trigger more creativity. It should unleash creativity. So it's not just about saying, oh, we creatives are driving society. But if we hear the UN coming up with these policies, we say, hey, come through to the creative industries and see what we can contribute. See what we will bring to these policies that are being created. And I think it's so important because I speak about my work as upstream and downstream. The downstream is where I work in this incredible community called the Makers Valley, and we deal with a lot of issues, to be honest. There's social issues and environmental issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But we are in the thick of it. We're in the reality. We're dealing with it face-to-face, engaging. We understand what's happening from a local level. But what's frustrating is knowing that no matter what we do sometimes, it's the people at the top that actually contributed to it. It's the systems change, the systems thinking that we're speaking about, is that the upstream needs to be thought about. And Desmond Tutu speaks about this example or analogy of someone drowning in a river. You want to make sure that you're getting the person out and relieving them from drowning. That is obviously immediate and important. But you also want to figure out why this person fell in the river in the first place, upstream. And this is the kind of work that I'm really interested in, is that I don't believe that anyone should just be only focused on the downstream issues, because you'll never understand what was happening upstream. But the people upstream lose so much, like they don't understand what's happening on the ground. They lose touch with reality when they're stuck in their boardrooms and making decisions about the whole of society, and they've never been downstream. And so I get so frustrated with groups of people that are stuck in those polar opposites. We have to bring these groups together. And the way that we work is bringing downstream and upstream to these groups, to these kind of platforms that we're having today. And so I want to say that creativity shouldn't just be like local communities on the ground. We have to influence what's happening upstream. We have to be present at COP27 that's happening in Egypt later this year. We have to be present in city decisions, in mayor discussions. When she announces the budget for the year, creatives have to be in the room for those specific events. And we shouldn't just kind of put ourselves into this box that we kind of just local and we like just, meet on the ground and engage in community. Actually, let's release ourselves out of that way of thinking, that we belong in every single table and that the creative voice matters at those decisions up top as well. And that's how we'll drive society. And then, to my favorite part, is that creative economies are at the heart of what matters. And this is what I was saying, is that we have to measure what matters. And creativity showcases that. What's his name? Cyril, our friend Cyril. He's been speaking. He spoke about, I think 2 years ago, a moral economy, which I just want to put out there, and you can think about that for yourselves. What does that even mean? When you don't, we can say these things, and that's what I'm trying to say, is everyone is speaking about these alternative economies, and I'm excited about it. I'm not trying to mock it, please don't get me wrong. But it's exciting that there are these alternative models and ways of doing things. But let's not just get stuck at saying it. Let's practice and experiment what it looks like. So we speak about a circular economy. Are you doing that in your workspace? We speak about a moral economy. Are you doing that? So this is the thing, is that we have to just do. We can't just speak about it anymore. We have to experiment. And this is why I love our community, Makers Valley. So I'm going to share a video at the back. It's just going to play while I'm talking, hopefully. Yeah, there we go. Which is just going to play. It's a community video about Makers Valley, so the imagery will showcase, but I'm just going to share a little bit about what's happening. And I must say, it has been an experiment. We have not got everything right. There are a lot of failures, but can you see it? Okay, cool. But what's been exciting is that we've tried. And we've thought about what does a well-being economy look like in our context. So for those of you who have never heard of Makers Valley, it's a community on the eastern side of Johannesburg CBD, so just past Jeppe, so we're in Maboneng now, past Jeppe, like in Bertram's, after the Ellis Park Stadium. We base there. It's Bertram's, Judithspaal, Bays Valley, Troyville, that area that we work in and kind of play in. And it was started by a group of creatives. This incredible group of people that was saying, let's vision something better for this community. And it was also, I would say, catalyzed by the fact that there was a new development in this area called Victoria Yards. And the property owner there, Brian Green, was really saying, we want to think about the surrounding community, acknowledging, first of all, that he is a commercial guy and that he doesn't have experience in community engagement, social upliftment, all of those fancy terms, but he acknowledged at least that there was a need for something. And he allowed a space for these creatives to use to kind of be a hub. And it was like a higgledy-piggledy space. It was just like people donated things, Wi-Fi was eventually donated, chairs, tables. But as much as it was higgledy-piggledy, it was a space where people felt like they belonged. And it drew the community in. And people were saying, what can we do? How can we be part of thinking about something more for our community? How can we envision something better? And the approach was really organic. It wasn't saying, okay, this is what the Wellbeing Economy says. 1, 2, 3, these are the steps that you must follow. But we kind of saw what could be and said, okay, community, let's think about what we want to see for ourselves. And this is really important when we think about decolonization, is that we don't want to just import things or policies that often governments do from the global north and just kind of plonk it into local areas. It's about recognizing, okay, there might be learnings here, but how do we want to see this reflected in our own environment? How do we want to be reflected within ourselves? How do we want to showcase what is our spirit that we're bringing to this? And this is the beautiful thing, is that you can have these terms, circular economy, green economy, moral economy, but how will it reflect in the way that you kind of unravel your business or your community or your space? How will you kind of showcase that in your own way? And the name even Makers Valley was through this participatory process of people deciding what they wanted to call it. And it had this history of making. Victoria Yards was an old car chop shop, and people, there were artisans in this space. So there's a real history and story of making in this community, and obviously because it's founded by these creatives, but also the spirit of we want to be change makers. We want to actually make the difference. We're not going to be dependent on waiting for government to do things. We want to be active and proactive. And there's a term called asset-based community development, which we didn't know, or the group of creatives that created Makers Valley didn't use this term when creating it. But it is the way of, I would say, now that we know it, it's like, oh, that's cool, we were doing that already. But what asset-based community development is about is saying, you're not going to think about the deficits in this community. People could say, oh, shame Bertram's, oh, it's so impoverished, they don't have this, they don't have that. That is not the approach in terms of the way that we approach community development. We think about asset-based, not deficit. And it takes you away from the scarcity and goes back to this renewable resource of creativity. What do we have already? What exists? How can we use this community, the space that Brian just gave us, the people, the fabrics that they've made it, the chairs that have just been given to us? How do we use what we have? These are assets. And this is the way that we're going to approach this community. And this is why I love it, because it started with this mindset of we want to do, not going to wait. We want to do. And I think it's so important, I speak about this at BMW Foundation, is that nonprofits actually shouldn't exist. Like, if we were really true and honest about it, is that if we lived in a perfect world, they wouldn't exist. But some of them are creating themselves up to be exactly, like I was saying, traditional organizations that focus on growth, that focus on doing everything, and they kind of replicate or scale their models. And even at Gibbs, we taught these things and these approaches. But I want to say, let's really think, before you start a nonprofit or whatever, think about your business model. And it's where we at now with Makers Valley is, do we want to be true to what we said we want to be? Or are we going to listen to the funders? So there's a lot of advocacy and activism, even with funders, to say, rethink your briefs, rethink your proposals or your calls for applications, because the way that you're doing it is perpetuating the problems that we already have in society. So when we think about a nonprofit, we should actually think about the end goal. If you're starting something and Makers Valley is thinking, we want to envision an area, or we call it Josie's heart of social and creative enterprise. That's what we want to see. And when will we be able to see that? In 30 years' time, 20 years' time, 10 years' time? At the organization I'm with, Wellbeing Economy, we're saying we want to see governments transform and use Wellbeing Economy approaches by 2040. You have to have a limit. If you're a nonprofit saying we're going to exist forevermore, you're creating this dependency, you're creating the problem, in a sense, because you're saying you want the problem to exist as long as you're around. And so my call is really to challenge that, to think about the way that you start, to start with the why. Why do we exist? And how long do we even need to be around? We don't have to exist forever. And this is where we really need to challenge. It's kind of become habitual. It's an unlearning. We need to unlearn this obsession of growth and really think about the need. What need are we trying to solve? So, back to the Makers Valley story, is that we're thinking about how long we want to exist for. We're thinking about, have we solved the problem? But we're really thinking about, if we didn't exist, would this community continue to thrive? Because we don't want it to be dependent on us. And this is where we start to see this sense of active participation, because we're starting to see that we are enabling, we're not providing. We are enabling a community. We're saying you already have the assets, the talent, the creativity, the everything. You're an asset-based community. We are just here to create a platform or to create a space for you to thrive. And this really changes the direction of a community. Instead of a nonprofit coming in to say, these are all our solutions, come come and get, or come and volunteer. That doesn't give anybody a sense of purpose. That doesn't give anybody a sense of agency or ownership. But when we start to see youth saying, hey, I've got this idea, I want to solve this social issue that I, by the way, am an expert in because I've experienced it in my every single day life for the past however many years, they get to come up with the solution. They get to do the design thinking. They get to innovate the solution, and they get to create the social enterprise. They get to generate the income for themselves. They get to have a sense of ownership, and they're more invested in the change in this community. They're less likely to leave as well, because if you're just depending on some other person, you're just like, oh, I'll go to the next place and try and get help there, or this community is never going to change, I'll just leave. And that's what we were seeing with a lot of our youth, just leaving because they're looking for greener pastures. But now they're excited to stay. They want to see their businesses grow. They want to see their businesses thrive. They have a sense of investment in this community, and it's not just about them. They're seeing a bigger collective picture. And this is kind of the way that we've approached Makers Valley. There's been so many incredible social entrepreneurs that have been birthed in this space. From food security to cleaning, like making sure our environment's clean, green, and safe, to urban patrolling, to car washing, and all using and thinking about sustainable approaches to their businesses. And imagine, I really think about these things that UNESCO is doing as like incubators, like we're testing out what could be in a broader society. Imagine we thought about small businesses growing and investing in them instead of these big monopolies. We would really start to see a sense of active citizenship, because now everybody's getting a piece of the pie and everybody wants to contribute in terms of making their society better. So yeah, Makers Valley is really exciting. If you are ever interested in visiting, it's not far away at all. We'd love to host you. I know Hector's in the crowd as well, and I think so someone else. But the people that are representing Makers Valley are here as well. And please chat to them and see when you can visit and see how you could contribute if you want to be a part of it. But the thing is, we are not trying to, everybody or all the funders say, how are you scaling Makers Valley? We're not trying to replicate Makers Valley in other areas. That's the whole point, is that this started because of people in this community. They chose the name, they thought of the ideas, this is their thing. We're not trying to say everywhere must be a Makers Valley, but we're trying to say that the approach is important. It's not about the outcome, it's not about saying, oh, these are Makers Valleys everywhere. Now it's about saying the process of co-creation, the process of having participatory engagement. These are the things that we need to bring into other communities, into the way that we develop our society, on a micro level and on a macro level. And I wanted to just kind of speak about a well-being economy to just kind of wrap things up, is that everyone asks, what is the 3-step process to get to a well-being economy? And I'm trying to kind of emphasize that there's not a step. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to do 1, 2, and 3. The point is that it has to be co-created and that we have to bring knowledge together. And so with the well-being economy, it is recognizing there's a plurality of different solutions, not just one. There's never just one solution. There are many. And you could use certain aspects of different solutions together. But it's about saying, okay, we've got all these incredible alternative models. How are we going to draw on that? What is relevant for my local context? What language is more appropriate for the way that we engage in our community? How do we want to bring this to us and make it our own? And this is what the well-being economy is saying, is that it's not just saying 1, 2, 3, clips, the end, it's the easy way out. Because obviously if that was, then it would be happening. There is no easy way out. The point is sustainability takes time. It's not fast. It's not cheap. It's not easy. It takes dialogue. Like you might be like, oh, I can't do this. I have to engage with the community. I already know the answer. No, you don't. Engage, speak, have dialogues, have meetings. This is kind of indigenous knowledge coming to the forefront. This is the way that African people used to do it, is to engage, like discuss what are we wanting to see as a community before we just make approaches and kind of impose them on people. And so this is my last call to action to you, is really think about your business as creatives. Who are you serving your business to? Have you engaged them in the process of creating your business? Have you made sure that they're part of the process of thinking about the product, thinking about the marketing strategy, whatever it is, whatever process, touch point of your business? Have you spoken to the end user about that? Have you involved them, not just from like, oh, I need your insights, but actually you're part of this. You add value to this. You contribute to this bigger picture that we're wanting to see. And I think if we change the way that we approach things, it's not just about getting the answer right, but it's about how we get to that answer. I think that's what's going to lead to sustainability. So I'm going to wrap it up there, because I went off on a bit of a tangent.
Thank you so much, Thobile. I think that the thing that for me was energizing about your presentation was thinking about how you created Makers Valley and how you involved people in that creation process and how you let people determine it from the name to what they did. We're going to take a round of questions for 10 minutes before we take a break. So do we have questions from anybody? Okay.
Here.
Back here and here.
Hi, thank you very much for an amazing presentation. And I like what you're saying, and I'm coming at this as a person who is, I'm speaking representing a village in every sense of the word. You know, I'm from a place called Thohoyandou, and I am part of a group of 7 thought leaders who have developed a concept called Vendor Creative Cartel. And although our approach is not necessarily, we don't come from, we're not a non-profit organization. We have a business agenda. But the space requires so much education in sustainability that in some way we have to take a non-profit approach in having to go out of our way to ensure that we can set the space up for them to understand what the business model is. So currently we've been executing it in the form of an event called Acoustics and Poetry, which I say this with like, maybe a bit of it is my fault, but I say with sadness that, I mean, we've been running for 4 years from Pocket. We started from a group of about 50 people, and our most successful event, which was before COVID, had about 2,000 people. And this is a poetry and music festival. But the main concept is not just about that. There's again, it's sustainability. It's not about coming to an event and leaving the event and nothing has happened to any of the artists or any of the businesses that we're helping support. It's they're not getting booked, or they're getting booked but just within that location, and the businesses only exist if there's an event like this, and that type of thing. Now, the problem that I want to talk about is something that you're also touching on, where once in a while there's people from government come and set up these workshops, and they use these buzzwords and say, some of those buzzwords are like, yes, sustainability, fourth industrial revolution, all these things that we barely even understand. And we know there's a lot of money involved there, we're paying the taxes, but we don't actually see what these conversations are about. Honestly speaking, they're like just seminars for us to listen and then, eat whatever you guys have for us and then go home. So I don't know what advice you have because I mean, if we're already having a conversation about how difficult this is in a city, you can only imagine like in a village, And the thing about this place that also breaks my heart is that we come from a really, it's a really economically, is that a word? Like rich place, right? From a tourism perspective, from an agriculture perspective, from just the richness of the culture, and so there's so much to do, right? But there's nothing sustainable, especially from a creative point of view. These conversations are not happening. And honestly speaking on behalf of my organization, we don't want to be teaching for 10 years just so you can catch up and then start making a profit. And that's where, I'm gonna end it at that. So I don't know if I actually asked the question.
I feel you though. I get what you're saying, because it is something that. So I'm not saying like we've got it perfect. I think I started with we failed in so many aspects, and one of those things is we went from being just a movement, not registered, just a movement, to saying, okay, we need to be a non-profit. Okay, let's register with CIPC. Okay, but the CIPC is not enough, so we then did an NPO. Oh no, now because corporates, they won't give us funding, so now we need a PBO. So the more we got into these different levels of administration, which benefit your business or your non-profit or whatever it is, also limit you. And this is the tension that I find myself in, is this pull and like kind of letting go and allowing for some space to learn and kind of compromise. I have to say we had to compromise in so many different situations, but we've pointed those compromisations, if that's a word, out. We've said, okay, was that true to what our business why was? Like, did we sell ourselves short in this situation in order to get funding? And this is why I really believe so much work needs to be happening in the funding space. We need to be advocating, because they put us into these traps that we have to kind of sell ourselves and sell everything that we stood for in the first place in order to just get a piece of the pie. So I'm not saying that you can't, like, it's going to happen. But I think you have to acknowledge that you've done it, if you've done it. Or if you're about to do it, engage again with your community to say, this is the tension here. We've got this funder that might not 100% align to our vision or our values. How do we want to engage in this? What are they going to bring? What are the pros and cons that this situation will bring? And there also has to be times where you kind of fight back. So there's an example now where an urban farmer in our community was kicked off her land. And through a series of events, we've also had to create advocacy groups, written to newspapers, create forums around discussing how could the city, how could departments of social development do this. It speaks against everything that they claim to say. Like, they're speaking about urban farming as if they're doing it everywhere, but they go and do exactly what they're not supposed to do in our community. And so there's times where you have to fight back and acknowledge, what are you going to lose in those situations? We might lose funding, we might lose opportunities to work with them. We're trying to say, this shouldn't mean we're not going to work with you, but it should mean that we want to see this change. The way that you approached our community was not cool. The way that you engaged, just promising things and you haven't delivered, is not acceptable. But don't kick us out of the conversation just because we're disagreeing with you. We want to continue engaging, but this is why we believe that this is not fair. And this is what I'm starting to do with our funders as well, is to say, hey, I know you want it this way, but have you thought about this? Like, the way that you're going to be seen as well in our community, if you've got this forceful approach, is not going to help your reputation in the first place. So try find ways to showcase to your funder, actually, we also want the best for you. We've also got your interests at heart. This thing of sustainability is going to help you in the long run as well. So our values should also help you create your vision. But it's about a compromise. They have to compromise, and you also might have to find ways to compromise. It might be that they can't do this way of doing it now, but they promise in 3 years' time, they will get to that level of ensuring that they're sustainable, for example. So there's different kind of circumstances, but I think it is about voicing that you see there's a tension and saying, hey, how can we do this? How do we think about this as a community? But also saying to the person that is at fault, hey, we acknowledge that you're at fault here. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to reach to a compromise to ensure that this is better in the future?
Cool, thank you so much. Next question.
Hi. I just wanted to, I don't know, like, I like the way it seems like you listen to the community that you're trying to help before you help them. For me, that's a very valuable thing because I've met people who are also trying to help people, but the problem that they usually have is they don't first listen. They don't know what the problem is. They only, it's like they just want to see the world change so that from their perspective it looks good. But sometimes, you know, you've only helped yourself, you haven't really helped the people. So, but what I find, I don't know, maybe I don't understand is how would you define creativity within your idea of sustainable creativity? I don't know, because, you know, it's an elementary word that we pass around, and I feel like as a creative, as people label me my whole life, you know, it kind of like boxes me, and I don't like to be boxed. But when you speak of sustainable creativity, then I just want to understand, what is it about making an environment sustainable or creating a sustainable solution for a community that is creative from your perspective? Is it the listening to the community so that you know what to fix? Or maybe you could take it from there.
Cool. Yeah, so just to the point of listening, I think we also, a lot of us need to unlearn what we've learned in corporate spaces. I come from a marketing and advertising background where, like, again, it's like first to market, we need to do this. This is the meeting. We need to make sure this is the outcome at the end of the meeting. Those approaches, when I came to this community, even as a leader of the organization, they're like, what is your 90-day plan? I'm like, I don't even know the community. I haven't even engaged. I don't know what the issues are. Actually, we need to kind of tell people to relax, that you need to unlearn your way of doing business, because it's counterintuitive to what creativity means. And I think we have to start there, is that it's going to look different. Like, my understanding of creativity is just the possibility of thinking. It's not limited to this way. It's not saying, okay, when a CEO starts, they have to do a 90-day plan. They have to do this report to the CEO, whatever. Like, it's not about saying this is the way that things have to be done. It's saying, but they are a multitude of different ways. And this is what we start to see when we listen to a community, is that the way that you thought, because I often go into meetings, and it's something I'm trying to unlearn personally, is I come into a meeting and I'm already like, I know this is the answer already, but I'm just going to listen just for the sake of listening, because I know it's the right thing to do. And so often I'm just swept off my feet, knowing like, flip, this solution that I brought was completely different, and actually maybe not even the best. Like, there are so many other ways of approaching this issue. And that's what I believe is creativity. Creativity is so broad. You can have technological creativity. It can be, there's different sectors, business creativity, innovation, like, creativity is such a broad concept. But I believe it's exploring and inquiring the different ways of approaching something, or the different ways about thinking about something. That is what creativity means to me. And I think the solutions, if you've started with that point of let's be creative and finding solutions and allowing the different possibilities to kind of emerge, I feel that the process or the outcome will eventually also be creative. But I feel like if you just starting with the start point is, I want to have a creative solution, I want to be creative, if that's kind of like an idol for you, or you want to be recognized as the most creative city, there's pressure of trying to kind of just do things differently for the sake of doing it. So that's not that's like why I'm saying you shouldn't start with the end goal of how can we be creative. you should start with the beginning of how this process can allow for creativity. And I think the end result will get you there inherently because you've allowed for creativity to come up. And the solutions that have come in our community are like incredibly creative. There's so many like interesting things that I never would have thought of that people from our community said, hey, can we try this? Love Our City Clean is like, hey, can we start a community currency where we're recycling waste and offering people food security initiatives around that? And it started off with just like a token system, then it's gone to a Google Sheet, and now we have our community currency called MVPs. We've evolved this currency into something completely amazing, but it all just started with somebody saying, hey, let's think differently. And there's obviously things like you saying in terms, I think it was at the back saying, how do you educate? Because you've got this knowledge and you're wanting to showcase, like for recycling, for example. We wanted to say, hey, there's ways to kind of get rid of waste. It's not just through the dustbin, but there's other ways. I think there is an element of education, but it's again engaging. How, community, do you want us to educate you? Should we like have a dialogue about this and hear your thoughts and why we believe recycling is important, for example? And when people start to experiment and try, that's when we start to see behaviors change. Because sometimes just saying, hey, this is what we believe you should do, it doesn't change behavior. And that's what we started to see with this community currency at the beginning, is that people were just like, I'm going to recycle, but I want food. That was like the ultimate aim. It wasn't thinking about the recycling inherently. It was actually thinking about food at the forefront. But I feel like the community has started to see the benefits of recycling, the benefits of how this is changing my household, the way that my children are now engaging with waste, the things that they're doing at Timbuktu or Safe Study now with that waste that we recycled, and seeing broader opportunities and broader possibilities with what waste can create. They're starting to see that waste is valuable. So it never just starts with, I want to give you this education. It starts with having a conversation, trialing, experimenting, reflecting, hey, this didn't work. As a community, let's see, what do we want to change? And like I said, it's a long way, but it's the best way.